Your real enemy is not the person who hates you. It is not the person who betrayed you. It is not the person who stands against your ambitions. Your real enemy is the version of yourself that keeps surrendering your power. Your greatest enemy is the unmastered self, because the person who can most easily prevent your growth is often the person you meet every morning in the mirror. External enemies can create obstacles, but they cannot completely determine your response. Your own habits, fears, impulses, excuses, and patterns can quietly sabotage you even when nobody is standing against you. This is why self-mastery begins with an uncomfortable form of honesty. You must stop looking only outward for the reason your life is not moving in the direction you want. Sometimes the circumstances are genuinely difficult, and sometimes other people create real obstacles. But there is still one question you can control. What are you doing with the circumstances you have been given? The unmastered self constantly searches for excuses because excuses provide temporary comfort. If you blame another person, you do not have to examine your own decisions. If you blame bad luck, you do not have to change your habits. If you blame the past, you can avoid responsibility for the present. But responsibility is where power begins. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. Your unmastered self often appears in small rather than dramatic ones. It appears when you choose another hour of distraction instead of doing meaningful work. It appears when you know you should say no but agree because you fear disappointing someone. It appears when criticism makes you defensive before you even consider whether it contains useful information. It appears when you make a promise to yourself and break it because nobody else will know. These moments seem insignificant, but repeated thousands of times, they shape your character. The enemy within becomes stronger through repetition. If you repeatedly choose comfort, comfort becomes easier to choose. If you repeatedly avoid difficult conversations, avoidance becomes your instinct. If you repeatedly seek approval, dependence becomes part of your identity. The solution is not to hate yourself. Self-hatred rarely produces lasting transformation. Instead, you must become an observer of yourself. Study your patterns as if you were studying another person. Notice when you lose focus. Notice what makes you angry. Notice what makes you insecure. Notice when you procrastinate and what emotions appear just before you do it. Notice the situations where you repeatedly make decisions that you later regret. This awareness creates distance between you and your automatic behavior. Once you can see the pattern, you can begin changing it. One of the most dangerous forms of self-sabotage is confusing feelings with facts. You may feel incapable, but that does not prove that you are incapable. You may feel afraid, but fear does not automatically mean danger. You may feel rejected, but rejection does not define your worth. You may feel tired and want to quit, but temporary exhaustion does not always mean the goal is wrong. The unmastered mind treats every feeling as an instruction. The disciplined mind listens to feelings but evaluates them. This difference can completely change your life. You also need to understand that self-mastery is not about controlling every detail of your existence. It is about controlling your response to what happens. You cannot control whether someone criticizes you, but you can control whether you allow criticism to destroy your confidence. You cannot control whether an opportunity fails, but you can control whether you learn from the failure. You cannot control whether someone leaves your life, but you can control whether you abandon yourself afterward. This is where inner strength develops. Each difficult situation becomes an opportunity to practice command over yourself. The more you practice, the less power your impulses have over you. Eventually, discipline becomes more natural than avoidance. Patience becomes stronger than urgency. Thoughtfulness becomes stronger than reaction. You begin to trust yourself because your actions consistently support your intentions. That is when the unmastered self begins losing its influence. You are no longer fighting an enemy outside yourself. You are transforming the internal patterns that once kept you trapped. The real victory is not becoming someone who never struggles. It is becoming someone who can recognize the struggle, understand it, and choose a better response. When you master yourself, you become less dependent on perfect circumstances, constant approval, and immediate comfort. You become capable of moving forward even when fear is present, even when progress is slow, and even when nobody is encouraging you. Your greatest enemy was never simply the weakness you possessed. It was the unconscious decision to keep obeying that weakness. The moment you become conscious of it and begin choosing differently, you start taking your power back. Destroying the excuses that keep you weak begins with recognizing that an excuse is often more dangerous than an obvious failure because it allows you to remain comfortable while believing you are still trying. Failure at least gives you information. An excuse gives you protection from reality. It tells you that the problem is somewhere outside yourself, that the timing is wrong, that circumstances are unfair, that you are not ready, or that you will begin later. The danger is that excuses rarely sound like lies. They often sound reasonable. You tell yourself that you need more time, more money, more knowledge, more confidence, or better circumstances. Sometimes these things are genuinely necessary, but often they become convenient reasons for delaying the uncomfortable action that could actually change your situation. The weak version of yourself loves excuses because excuses remove immediate pressure. If you say you cannot begin because conditions are not perfect, you never have to experience the possibility of failure. If you say you are too busy, you never have to examine how you spend your time. If you say someone else is responsible for your situation, you do not have to ask what you could have done differently. Excuses protect the ego, but they also protect the weakness that keeps you trapped. The first step is to become brutally honest about the difference between a genuine obstacle and a convenient excuse. A genuine obstacle requires adaptation. An excuse requires postponement. When you face an obstacle, you ask, what can I do with what I have? When you make an excuse, you ask, why can I not do anything? That difference reveals your mindset. You cannot always control the circumstances around you, but you can almost always identify one action within your control. Perhaps you cannot change the past, but you can change what you do today. Perhaps you cannot control another person's behavior, but you can control how much access you give them. Perhaps you cannot guarantee success, but you can improve your preparation. Perhaps you cannot remove fear, but you can take one controlled step despite it. Action begins where excuses end. Another powerful way to destroy excuses is to stop waiting for motivation. Motivation is unstable because it depends on emotion. One day you feel ambitious and confident, another day you feel tired and uncertain. If your progress depends on feeling inspired, your progress will always be inconsistent. Discipline requires you to act even when the emotional excitement has disappeared. You do not need to feel ready to begin. You need to begin so that readiness can develop through experience. Every completed task creates evidence that you are capable of action. Every promise kept to yourself strengthens self-respect. Every time you overcome the temptation to postpone, you weaken the habit of avoidance. This is how excuses lose their power. You do not defeat them through one dramatic declaration. You defeat them through repeated behavior that proves they are no longer in charge. You must also be careful about the excuse of perfectionism. Many people say they are waiting until they can do something perfectly, but beneath this desire for perfection is often fear. If you never begin until you know exactly what to do, you can remain inactive indefinitely. Real mastery comes through imperfect action, correction, and repetition. Start with what you know, learn what you do not know, adjust when necessary. Progress requires movement. The world does not reward the person who constantly explains why he could not begin. It rewards the person who takes responsibility for his next move. Your excuses may have protected you in the past, but you do not need them to protect you forever. At some point, Comfort becomes more expensive than failure because it costs you years of potential. Destroying your excuses means choosing responsibility over explanation, action over hesitation, discipline over mood, and growth over comfort. The moment you stop asking why you cannot and start asking what you can do next, your relationship with difficulty changes. Problems remain, but you become more resourceful. Fear remains, but you become more courageous. Uncertainty remains, but you become more capable of moving through it. Your weakness begins to lose its favorite weapon, the excuse that gives it permission to remain exactly where it is. Master your emotions before they master you, because your emotions can become powerful forces that either serve your purpose or quietly control your life. Anger, fear, jealousy, pride, resentment, and insecurity are natural parts of being human, but they become dangerous when you allow them to make decisions without examination. An emotional reaction can appear in seconds, while its consequences can last for years. Someone insults you and suddenly you feel that you must respond. Someone succeeds and you feel threatened. Someone rejects you and you begin questioning your worth. Someone challenges your authority and your pride demands that you prove yourself. In these moments, the real battle is not against the person in front of you. The battle is against your own impulse to react automatically. If another person knows exactly what makes you angry, insecure, or desperate, they may be able to influence you simply by pressing those emotional buttons. Mastering yourself means learning where those buttons are located. Begin by studying your triggers. Notice what situations consistently change your emotional state. Notice the words that make you defensive, the people who make you anxious, and the circumstances that make you lose perspective. Do not judge yourself for having these reactions. Study them. Your emotional patterns contain information about your inner weaknesses and desires. If criticism makes you extremely defensive, it may reveal that your confidence depends heavily on approval. If another person's success creates intense jealousy, it may reveal an ambition that you have not admitted to yourself. If rejection makes you desperate to regain someone's attention, it may reveal emotional dependence. The emotion itself is not necessarily the enemy. The unconscious reaction is. You must learn to create a pause between feeling and action. This pause is where self-control lives. When anger appears, wait before responding. When fear tells you to run, examine whether there is genuine danger or simply discomfort. When jealousy appears, ask what quality in the other person you actually desire. When pride prevents you from admitting a mistake, consider what matters more, protecting your ego or improving yourself. The pause gives your rational mind time to return. Without it, emotion takes control of the steering wheel. Emotional mastery does not mean suppressing your feelings. Suppression simply pushes emotions underground, where they may eventually emerge in unhealthy ways. Instead, acknowledge what you feel without automatically obeying it. You can be angry and still speak calmly. You can be afraid and still move forward. You can feel rejected and still maintain self-respect. You can feel jealous and transform that feeling into motivation. You can feel disappointed without allowing disappointment to become your identity. This is a much deeper form of strength than pretending nothing affects you. Another important principle is understanding that emotions often exaggerate reality. When you are angry, a small disagreement can feel like a major attack. When you are afraid, uncertainty can look like disaster. When you are insecure, one person's criticism can seem like proof that everyone thinks the same way. Emotional distance allows you to ask whether your interpretation matches the facts. What actually happened? What am I assuming? What evidence supports my reaction? What response would serve me tomorrow, not just satisfy me in this moment? These questions can prevent temporary emotions from creating permanent consequences. You must also recognize that some people intentionally provoke emotional reactions. They may insult you, challenge your ego, create jealousy, or withdraw attention because they know you will chase their approval. If you react exactly as expected, they gain influence over you. If you remain calm and choose your response, their leverage decreases. You do not need to win every emotional battle. Sometimes refusing to participate is the strongest move available. Your goal is not to become cold, emotionless, or detached from life. Your goal is to become the person who can experience emotion without becoming controlled by it. When your emotions become information rather than commands, you gain freedom. You can listen to what they are telling you while still deciding what action serves your deeper values. That is the essence of emotional self-mastery. You feel everything, but you surrender control to nothing. Stop sabotaging your own future, because one of the most dangerous forms of defeat is the defeat you create yourself. When people imagine failure, they often picture an external enemy blocking their path, but self-sabotage is much quieter. It happens when your words say you want one thing while your daily actions produce something completely different. You say you want success, but you constantly choose distraction. You say you want peace, but you keep returning to unnecessary conflict. You say you want discipline, but you repeatedly negotiate with your commitments. You say you want a better future, but you continue protecting the habits that belong to your past. The first step in stopping self-sabotage is recognizing the contradiction between what you claim to want and what you consistently do. Your intentions may sound impressive, but your patterns reveal your priorities. If you repeatedly spend your evenings consuming meaningless content instead of developing a valuable skill, then your behavior is voting against the future you say you want. This does not mean you should become obsessed with productivity or punish yourself for every mistake. It means you must become honest about cause and effect. Every repeated choice has a consequence, and your future is being shaped by choices that may seem insignificant in the moment. Self-sabotage often begins with immediate comfort. The mind prefers rewards that arrive quickly. Scrolling gives immediate stimulation. Avoiding difficult work gives immediate relief. Seeking approval gives immediate reassurance. Staying in familiar situations gives immediate security. But these short-term rewards can create long-term costs. The person who constantly chooses immediate comfort eventually discovers that comfort has become expensive. Opportunities disappear. Skills remain undeveloped. Confidence weakens, and time passes without being recovered. You must learn to distinguish between what feels good now and what serves you later. This requires delayed gratification, the ability to accept temporary discomfort for a larger future benefit. Another form of self-sabotage is negative self-talk. You may repeatedly tell yourself that you are incapable, unlucky, unattractive, unintelligent, or destined to fail. When these statements are repeated long enough, the mind can begin treating them as facts. You then make decisions based on a false identity. You avoid opportunities because you expect failure. You refuse challenges because you assume you are not capable. You interpret mistakes as proof that your negative beliefs were correct. Break this cycle by separating facts from interpretations. A failure means something did not work. It does not automatically mean you are a failure. A rejection means someone said no. It does not mean nobody will ever say yes. A mistake means you made an error. It does not mean you are incapable of learning. Protecting your future also means protecting your environment. The people around you influence your standards, habits, and expectations. If you constantly surround yourself with people who encourage distraction, negativity, irresponsibility, or destructive behavior, maintaining discipline becomes harder. This does not mean treating people as enemies or abandoning everyone who thinks differently. It means becoming conscious of influence. Ask whether your environment supports the person you are trying to become. You must also stop waiting for a dramatic transformation. Self-sabotage is defeated through small corrections repeated consistently. Put the phone away when you need to focus. Keep one promise to yourself each day. Finish one important task before seeking entertainment. Say no to one unnecessary distraction. Take responsibility for one decision instead of blaming circumstances. These actions build evidence that you are capable of directing your behavior. Eventually, your identity begins to change because your behavior has changed. You become someone who follows through. The future you want is not created by one extraordinary decision. It is created by hundreds of ordinary decisions made when nobody is watching. Every day gives you another opportunity either to reinforce the patterns that have limited you or to weaken them. The goal is not perfection. The goal is alignment. Your actions should gradually move in the same direction as your values and ambitions. When you stop betraying your own goals for temporary comfort, you stop being your own obstacle and begin becoming your own ally. Turn your weaknesses into discipline by refusing to treat your limitations as permanent definitions of who you are. Every person has weaknesses. Some struggle with procrastination, others with anger, insecurity, distraction, impatience, fear, inconsistency, or the need for approval. The mistake is not having weaknesses. The mistake is allowing them to remain unconscious and unchallenged. A weakness becomes powerful when you repeatedly obey it without examining it. If you procrastinate every time a task becomes difficult, procrastination begins to feel like part of your personality. If you avoid uncomfortable conversations, avoidance becomes your natural response. If you constantly seek approval, dependence becomes familiar. But patterns can be changed, and discipline is one of the most effective ways to change them. Discipline begins with awareness. You must identify the specific weakness you want to transform. Do not use vague statements such as, I need to become better. Be precise. If your problem is distraction, identify what distracts you and when it usually happens. If your problem is inconsistency, identify where you repeatedly abandon your commitments. If your problem is fear, identify the situations you avoid because they make you uncomfortable. The more clearly you understand the weakness, the easier it becomes to design a response. Once you identify it, create a small rule that directly challenges it. If you constantly delay important work, commit to starting for 15 minutes before doing anything else. If you struggle with attention, remove unnecessary notifications and keep your phone away while working. If you avoid difficult conversations, practice addressing smaller issues directly instead of allowing resentment to grow. Discipline becomes powerful when it's specific enough to guide behavior. You should not expect yourself to transform overnight. Trying to eliminate every weakness at once often creates overwhelming pressure, and overwhelming pressure can lead back to avoidance. Choose one pattern and work on it repeatedly. Every time you resist the old behavior, you strengthen the new one. Every time you keep a commitment, you build evidence that you can trust yourself. This is how weakness gradually becomes discipline. Discipline is not simply forcing yourself to suffer. It is the ability to choose according to your long-term values rather than your immediate impulses. You may want to remain in bed, but your goal requires you to get up. You may want to respond angrily, but your values require patience. You may want to spend hours consuming entertainment, but your future requires focused work. Discipline is the bridge between what you say you want and what you actually become. Your weaknesses can also reveal where your greatest opportunities for growth exist. If criticism easily destroys your confidence, learning emotional independence can make you stronger than someone who has never examined that vulnerability. If you struggle with procrastination, developing consistent action can become one of your greatest strengths. If you fear rejection, practicing courage can expand your world dramatically. The weakness itself is not the final story, it is the starting point. You should also stop using shame as your primary method of change. Be honest with yourself, but do not spend all your energy attacking yourself for past mistakes. Shame often creates a cycle in which you feel bad, seek comfort, repeat the behavior, and then feel worse. Discipline works differently. It focuses on the next action. You made a mistake, learn from it. You broke a promise, make a better promise and keep it. You lost focus, Return to the task. You failed. Study what happened and try again. The goal is correction, not endless punishment. Over time, your repeated choices create a new identity. You become more patient because you practice patience. You become more focused because you protect your attention. You become more courageous because you repeatedly act despite fear. You become more disciplined because you stop negotiating with every impulse. This transformation is quiet. Nobody may notice the first 100 small decisions, but eventually the results become visible. You respond differently. You work differently. You think differently. You trust yourself more. Your weakness has not magically disappeared. You have developed the ability to manage it. That is real strength. You do not need to become a perfect person. You need to become a person whose discipline is stronger than the weaknesses that once controlled his choices. When you transform weakness into discipline, you stop seeing your limitations as walls and begin seeing them as training grounds. Each weakness becomes another opportunity to practice self-command, and every act of self-command makes you harder to defeat by your own impulses. Conquer yourself before trying to conquer the world, because external power means very little if you remain controlled by your own impulses, fears, habits, and insecurities. Many people spend their lives trying to gain influence over others while having very little influence over themselves. They want respect, status, recognition, money, or authority, but they cannot control their attention for an hour, keep promises to themselves, manage anger, or resist temporary temptation. This creates a dangerous contradiction. You may appear powerful from the outside while being internally controlled by every distraction, emotion, and opinion that crosses your path. Real power begins when you become capable of directing yourself. The first territory you must conquer is your attention. Your attention determines where your energy goes, and whatever controls your attention gradually influences your life. If you constantly allow notifications, gossip, entertainment, arguments, and other people's demands to interrupt you, your mind becomes scattered. You may spend an entire day reacting without intentionally moving toward anything important. Self-mastery requires choosing what deserves your attention and protecting it. When you work, work. When you learn, learn. When you rest, rest. Do not allow every external stimulus to become an order. The second territory is your emotions. You cannot prevent every emotion from appearing, but you can decide what you do with it. Anger may appear, but you can choose not to become destructive. Fear may appear, but you can choose to prepare instead of surrendering. Jealousy may appear, but you can study what it reveals about your ambitions. Pride may appear, but you can still admit when you are wrong. Emotional control creates freedom because other people become less capable of controlling you through provocation. The third territory is your habits. Your future is heavily influenced by what you repeatedly do when nobody is watching. If you consistently choose distraction, your attention becomes weaker. If you consistently choose discipline, your ability to focus becomes stronger. If you repeatedly avoid difficult tasks, avoidance becomes easier. If you repeatedly face discomfort, resilience grows. You cannot build a powerful life while protecting habits that continuously weaken you. This does not mean changing everything at once. It means identifying the habits that produce the greatest consequences and replacing them gradually. Another part of self-conquest is learning to accept responsibility. Responsibility does not mean believing that everything bad that happens is your fault. It means refusing to surrender your power to circumstances. You cannot control the past. You cannot control every person's opinion. You cannot control every opportunity or outcome, but you can control your preparation, your effort, your choices, and your response. When you focus on what remains within your control, you become more effective. Blame may provide temporary relief, but responsibility creates movement. You also need to conquer your dependence on approval. If your identity depends on being praised, you will become afraid of criticism. If your confidence depends on being accepted, rejection will control your decisions. If your goals exist mainly to impress others, their opinions will determine whether you continue. You must develop internal standards. Ask yourself whether your actions match your values, whether your choices are building the person you want to become, and whether you would continue pursuing the goal even if nobody applauded you. This is where independence develops. Conquering yourself also means becoming comfortable with discomfort. Growth rarely occurs entirely inside comfort. Difficult work, uncertainty, discipline, rejection, and failure are unavoidable parts of meaningful progress. If you constantly escape discomfort, you become increasingly sensitive to it. But if you deliberately face manageable challenges, your tolerance expands. You discover that discomfort is temporary and that you can remain steady while experiencing it. Over time, you become less afraid of difficult situations because you have evidence that you can handle them. The greatest victory is therefore not defeating another person. It is reaching a point where your mind, emotions, habits, and values work together instead of fighting against one another. You become more deliberate. You stop reacting automatically. You stop allowing temporary feelings to dictate permanent choices. You begin acting from principle rather than impulse. This is what it means to conquer yourself. You do not become perfect, and you do not eliminate every weakness. Instead, you become aware enough to recognize your weaknesses and disciplined enough to manage them. Once you develop that internal authority, external challenges become easier to face. You may still experience failure, rejection, criticism, and uncertainty, but they no longer have unlimited power over your direction. You have built something stronger than circumstances, command over yourself, and before you attempt to control your environment, influence others, or achieve anything significant, that internal command is the foundation upon which everything else must be built.